Well, as you know, I work for University of Illinois, for the College of ACES, for University of Illinois Extension, and we share some things with many other states, and that is the land-grant institution. Those were put into place by Abraham Lincoln when he was the President of the United States. And every state in the nation has a land-grant institution, including Iowa, at Iowa State University. And we're lucky enough this morning to have with us somebody who you probably recognize from Iowa, Steve Johnson, to take us through our next panel discussion. Steve, I won't make too much more introduction to you, but other than to say that you're from Ames, and we are certainly glad to have you here at the state of Illinois, and I welcome you. Steve Johnson.
Thanks. Good morning and greetings from the Tall Corn State. We'd like to go ahead and get started with a panel discussion. We've heard from an economist. We've heard about the importance of exports and trade, and we've heard about the research that drives soybean production. Let's hear from producers. On our panel are very qualified individuals. Our first presenter is Ken Dalenberg. Ken and his family operate a corn and soybean farm in east central Illinois in Champaign County. Ken's been involved in a lot of precision ag technology, has a background that's allowed him to work with both private and public institutions, including USDA ARS, as well as NASA. I found it interesting that Ken was a founding board member of the U.S. Soybean Export Council, as well as working on two farm bills, the 1990 and the 1996. Please welcome Ken Dalenberg. Ken?
One of the problems that we as farmers face every day, whenever you get up in the morning, what do you look at in the way of news? And how do you use that news to determine how you change the profitability on your farm? As we well know, looking at our yields, our corn and soybean yields over this past year decreased substantially. And so, what you thought you did this time of year to what the actual outcome was in the fall was totally different. But you have to start with a base scenario and work from there. And of course, as we move along with looking at what else is going on in the world today, we have Argentina and Brazil's production that is coming to harvest today. And how does that fit into your game plan as to marketing? We look at the backup of ships in Brazil and how that works into the whole export situation, because we right now are in the driver's seat of exporting beans. As you look at Argentina, and as John Bays was talking about with the differential export tax and the unwillingness of Brazilian farmers to sell beans, what impact does that have on the market and your profitability in the short term? Brazilian production, as we well know, is going to be higher this year. So ultimately, it means somewhere in the April and May, June timeframe that they're going to impact our market. So should you be selling early in their marketing year or later in the marketing year? And of course, our production will enter into the number of acres that we plant and the kind of weather that we have here with the declining carryout that we had this past year. One of the other things that, as we look at total production of not just soybeans, but we have to look at what is the corn production in those two countries. Brazil actually produces about 2.8 billion bushels of corn, of which half of it they export. We only export about 928 million bushels of corn this past year. And so you can see we're falling behind. Another question as we look at issues that affect us is what's the labor situation that impacts your farm? How do you make up a workforce that helps you stay on track and being profitable in the time frame that you need to be to get the crops planted? Somebody switch the slides on me because these aren't mine. we'll get back on track and not move to that. Sorry about that, guys, but my topic is Farm Bill International Trade and Regulation. But I was doing good so far. Okay, but anyway, back to where we were as far as the changing role of the U.S., as I was talking about, and the Argentina and Brazil are beginning to creep up as far as the total amount of soybeans. They're now going to be #1 in the world, and we're lagging behind because our acres are not increasing. Our U.S. soybean exports, China is, when you wake up in the morning, you better see what's going on in China and, what are the changes in their mood. If you watched 60 Minutes last night, there was a long segment on there about their housing, and is there a bubble in housing, and all the apartment and condos been built over there. I've been over there twice in the last 3 years, and I can verify that that actually is happening. There's many empty cities that have been built, and nobody's ever moved in those apartments. The other thing, the comment was made earlier that soybean yields are increasing faster than corn yields. They really are. If you go back and look at the kind of research that has been done in the last few years and the genetic changes that have happened as we move through the different diseases and the ability to model those diseases and create a genetic to control them, choosing the right soybean variety can make a difference in your profitability. As we look at, is the demand there? John spoke to that in a very large way, that we don't need to worry about demand. We need to worry about yield. Another aspect is, the Chinese goals is to increase, as John said, they need 70 million metric tons more over a period of time. And so somebody has to grow those beans. How does that affect your probability? We need to stay in the soybean market. We need to grow corn, but beans are still an important crop. We just need to figure out how to increase the profitability. The changes in the diet, China has actually increased the amount of meat that their people are eating, where we in the U.S. have more or less stayed static. And I think this bodes well for us as far as demand for soybeans in the Chinese market, because they have the largest population of hogs in the world. And from that aspect, they're always going to need our soybean meal. They're going to grow corn to feed the hogs, but they need our soybean meal to feed them also. Another aspect, as we look at the farm safety net, the Farm Bill and crop insurance are all a very important part of your farm profitability. Crop insurance, as you well know, this past year has a safety net that has had a big impact on what farmers' incomes this year are. And I think that we all need to take a hard look, because it may be the only safety net we have as we move forward. Another issue, which of course is affecting us right now, is Farm Bill and sequestration. What impact will sequestration have on farm payments? Will direct payments be there come fall? Will our percentage of CRP payments and acre payments be cut because of sequestration? Will FSA offices not have the amount of people in it because of furloughs? Will meat inspectors, the furloughs cause our meat plants to be cut down? And so there's a lot of things to be considered, because if we have to cut 6% out of the budget for the year, it means you have to cut 12% in the next 6 months in order to accomplish that. And I think that while we're looking at Farm Bill, the changes as we move forward, we know direct payments are going away, but will we have the ARC program? Is that an aspect that will keep us with a safety net for next year? Those are all questions yet to be decided. And I think that, as a farmer, when you wake up in the morning, don't just look at what the markets are doing, but look at what's going on in the big picture of the world, because that will control your longer-term profitability as much as your ability to manage. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. I'll have Stephen step up. And you guys from Champaign County are kind of interchangeable. You know, you could present each other's topic. But we'd like to hear from John Reifsteck. Again, John is from Champaign County. He serves on the Growmark Board of Directors as well as the Board of Truth about trade and technology. And I found it was interesting. He's also a member of the University of Illinois Crop Sciences Advisory Committee. John, if you would, let's hear about marketing, equipment, and labor strategies.
Well, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here today. I was quite interested to see what Kenny was going to say about my slides. And he did a great job, but what really was concerning me is what in the world am I going to say about his? Because I wasn't prepared for that. So one of the things you're going to get to do is you're going to see some of those slides again, but understand what I was meaning as I was trying to work through them. One of the neat things about PowerPoint presentations is if you keep them long enough, and I've got some that go back almost 20 years, is they're almost like a little bit of a diary. And you can go back and look at them and review them over a time and just see how wrong you really were in the past. And I've been wrong a lot about that because things change, and that's what about farming is about, is making changes and reacting to what's happening in today's environment. We've heard some discussions about corn and soybean yields. And this is a little chart I put together that I try to keep updated over time, and it shows Illinois corn and soybean yields since 1973. And you can almost break it up into little sections if you want to. I don't have a laser pointer that I can show it to you with, but you can see the variability in corn yields and more consistent soybean yields. And of course, remembering we can't talk about soybean profitability unless we talk about corn profitability, because there's almost no growers in here, I don't think, that don't grow both corn and soybeans. And they are part of a growing system that we all utilize. And so those two are interlinked, and they will be interlinked for a long period of time. But what is disturbing to me is if you drop a trend line on these. You can see the differences in the trend line yields between the corn and soybeans. Now, we've heard some speakers say today that soybean yields have been increasing, actually at a greater rate than corn yields. Doesn't look like that if you take a look at it over the past 20 years, but you can drop trend yields lines in about any place you want to. But this is a kind of a troubling phenomenon that I've seen on my farm. I mean, there was a period of time in the 1990s, 2000s where I thought I was growing better soybeans a decade before than I was the last few years. When you compound that with the increases in production in Argentina, the increases in production in Brazil, putting them together, at one period of time, and going back and looking at those slides, I was saying I was going to be producing more corn. And then there were some slides that I actually had that said all corn, because I thought that's where we were headed. But the last few years, especially if you go back and look at the problems we've had in growing corn on my farm, and I think a lot of other farms, I've kind of looked at that a little bit differently. And so I'm looking at a perspective now on my farm that we're going to go back into growing the corn and soybeans in a rotation, at least for a period of time, because of that volatility we've seen in corn yields. At one time, I thought we were past that. I thought the rootworm corn, the better genetics, had meant that we were almost bulletproof when it came to yield problems, and obviously that's not the case. The labor slide, and this is one I just want to pop up there because this is one that scares me to death. This is a picture of a soybean field. It doesn't look like it, but it's a soybean field that has a severe weed infestation problem. Having a chance to spend some time with growers in the South that are dealing with weed problems in cotton and soybeans and corn, Palmer amaranth and some of the others, some of them are to the point now with herbicide resistance that they're changing their cropping practices. They're looking at different things, growing crops in a different way. I heard a presentation from a farmer not too long ago and said he was actually limiting the number of row crop acres he was planting based on the number of laborers he can get to hand weed his fields. I've been through that once in my lifetime. I don't want to go back that way. So as we're thinking about this, this could be a game changer for us, is this resistance. Because don't think immigration reform doesn't mean something. Well, it very well could be in the future as these as this weed resistance continues on. Now, I know we have some new chemistry out there. The ability to use dicamba and 2,4-D will be coming on us in a fairly quickly. We'll be getting that technology. And I'm quite comfortable that our soybean plants will be more resistant to dicamba and to 2,4-D. I'm not sure that the neighbors' tomato plants that are planted right next to my fields will be, and the ornamentals. And so I think this is going to be a challenge for us. And of course, when we're talking about the equipment, the idea that we're going to be growing both corn and soybeans is going to change our perspective on equipment. At one time, I'm one of those guys that went to the wide rows because a few years ago I didn't think I was going to grow soybeans. Next time I change planters, and I don't know in another year or two, it's going to be a consideration. And I think a lot of us are going through this right now about thinking how we're going to deal with these things long term. Talking a little bit about marketing, here's just a picture of soybean prices at my local elevator over the last period of time, going back a while. My goodness, that kind of volatility, we didn't see that in a long period of time. So we can't talk about marketing anymore, I don't think, unless we talk about risk management. They are indistinguishable. You can't separate them out. And I think on my farm, one of the things I want to try doing is start looking at risk management as an investment and not just a cost. We think about machinery as an investment. We know it also has a cost factor, but think about how important risk management has been in the last 1 or 2 or 3 years. And it's something I have to do a better job of, I know, in the future. As bad as corn yields were last year, and as good as soybean yields were last year, risk management worked because a lot of farmers will say they still made more money on corn. And that's kind of a vindication that risk management, whatever program you've got, can make a significant difference on your farm. So with that, I just want to finish up with this prices received for soybeans by month, going back in a period of time. And again, the idea of the volatility and how we're going to manage through this next year or 2 years, I think could be really critical for our profitability. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Let's hear from our third farmer panelist. Ken Curtis is from Western Illinois. He's been farming most of his life, but he's got some uniqueness, not only a certified crop specialist, but he distributes fertilizer products, high calcium, byproduct gypsum to growers. Ken, let's hear about your systems approach. Ken Curtis.
Thank you, Steve. A little background, I've been no-tilling for 27 years now in Western Illinois. I'm going to give you a 500-foot flyover here in 8 minutes, so bear with me. Our approach is, I want you to think about the soil as not just dirt, it's a biological activity. We need to really rethink how we treat our soils. We're fortunate we're in the best place in the world to raise crops, and we need to rethink how we're approaching it. If any of you get the Furrow magazine last issue, it was kind of interesting to me. You got an implement company, John Deere, talking about biology, the living organisms in our soil. And Soybean Digest had an article. So it's something to hit the next level of yield, we're going to have to take that. Conventional mindset, genetics alone isn't going to get us where we need to go. I mean, they've got a great way, but there's no magic bullet. I wish there was. It'd be simple for all of us. But it's going to be a lot of little things we do to get us to the next yield level. The soil feeds the plants feed the soil. Getting our crops off to a good start with proper nutrition, keeping the plant energy level high is essential for optimum growth and yield. And this is the approach we take, and it's kind of interesting. University of Illinois, Illinois Department of Ag and EPA come up a couple years ago. You'll see it in magazines, the 4 R's, about right product, right form, right place, and right time. We're doing that on our operation. I think it's something that we're all going to have to be thinking about more. Just in general, the general mindset of convenience, tradition, and getting over more acres just isn't going to cut it to the next level. Especially with regulations coming down the road, the days of broadcasting are probably getting limited. This is an example here of our operation that we done a couple years ago where we're side dressing nitrogen. You see a little tank on the back. As we're side dressing nitrogen, we're putting micronutrients and a fungicide on at the same time. Right over the row, we can cut the cost down to a third because you're using a third of the rate right over it. We find the efficiency factor quite well. Our goal is to have our plants never stress all season long. Gypsum is another product, another tool in the toolbox we use in our operation. Some of the advantages we see it to it, it helps your soils flocculate, open up, allows for every inch of rain, you go 2 inches in the soil. It helps get oxidated water in the soil. It kind of helps weatherproof our soils under stress conditions. Obviously, as we've seen last year, it was too dry, the year before too wet. The other couple things I like about it, it gets calcium in our soil. Calcium's like the blood vessels in us. It helps nutrients flow up and down the plant to help adverse stress conditions. Then you got sulfur, which sulfur is key for protein development. So those are 2 elements we need to be thinking about using in our operations. equipment, set up a delivery system that accepts with the manager in a timely manner. And this is an example what we try to do. You can see where we're putting row support with the planter. You see we're pulling a tank with 2 different products. This allows us to put in-furrow support plus row support. I can't stress enough, your planter is the most important piece of equipment you have in your operation. Don't cut corners with it, because that first trip across the field determines the rest of the year. Here's an example of a pit stop where you can put fertilizer, seed, insecticide all in one stop, so even large operations will be able to go. Enhancing yields, soybean yields. We look on ours, we try to put all our nutrients early, right as we're planting our beans. My goal is to stimulate that root as big as possible, so I've got opportunity to enhance pod development later in the season. We're a big believer in foliar feeding. Here's several examples of when to do it. Stress condition, obviously. Post-glyphosate, 10 days. Flowering and pod fill. We try to do at least 2 of those. And each time when we're spraying, we'll evaluate whether we need an insecticide or fungicide at that time, and we'll go with it. Herbicides. Can't stress this enough. You can build a factory that gives you an opportunity to maximize yields, but if you put the wrong herbicide out there, you've negated all the advantages you take early. So get with your supplier, your advisor, match your herbicides up to what you're trying to accomplish out in your field. Organization, information, management results. We try to log all our data as we're going through the field each time, so at the end of the season, we can get with our advisors and analyze what we see that we're doing well, what we could do better. Our whole goal is to drop our per unit cost per bushel. And in closing, what I'd say, health is critical for high yields all season long. Pay attention to details. That is critical. Don't cut corners. We don't want that plants to stress. This is some of our crops from last year, even under no rain. We was able to maintain the greenness as long as possible to help us get to the end. Thank you very much.
Nice job, panelists. Now it's your time to ask questions. Todd Gleason will be in the crowd with the microphone, so feel free. Again, our first speaker was Ken Dalenberg. Our second speaker was John Reifsteck. And our last speaker was Ken Curtis. I've got the first question. How's that? Ken Dalenberg, I too was in Florida last week. Boy, that time went fast. We're at the Commodity Classic, and Secretary of Agriculture Vilsack was there on Friday morning, and we heard a lot about the Farm Bill, or the lack of uncertainty about the Farm Bill. And the American Soybean Association went on record as basically saying that they weren't sure there was going to be the money there to fund the shallow loss program, specifically ARC, or Agricultural Risk Coverage. If you would describe what's going on in Washington, D.C., or what's not going on, how sequestration works, and do we get a new Farm Bill or don't we get a new Farm Bill?
Well, as we look at the Farm Bill, of course, there is a mass confusion. In the Ag Outlook conference 2 weeks ago in Washington, if you looked at some of the discussion that came out of there, I think even they're confused as to whether or not politicians will move forward with the Farm Bill. It appears that in sequestration that agriculture is an area that is going to be cut. We have to have a 6% reduction in budget, but for us, realize that means a 12% reduction in the next 6 months, because it's over a whole year, but there's only half a year left. Direct payments, it's almost a given that they will not be in this next Farm Bill. Where we go with acre, it's really a puzzle as to what pieces will be there. Shallow loss has been a program that has been signed on to by several farm organizations. But as you look at the total cost, instead of the $25 million that ultimately had been talked about earlier, we in the farm or commodity groups had looked at a 14 to 17 billion or million dollar program, and now it's moved up to about a 25.4. And so agriculture, will there be a Farm Bill? It may not happen until August. From our sense, is if we get through sequestration, there will be money there, but the numbers are there to maintain the CRP program. The international marketing programs will probably be cut. And as you look at research, research is another area. USDA, ARS, those type programs are also going to be cut. And so it will impact us in a big way.
Other questions from the crowd? I've got a question for John Reifsteck. John, on your farm, how do you manage soybean price volatility?
Not as well as I'd like to, that's for sure. Well, I think, as we look at the marketing scheme, the risk management, there's one part of risk management is obviously crop insurance. And crop insurance last year, again, demonstrated how important that can be as a component. There's also the idea that, you have to be out there actively managing, marketing the crops. And sometimes I'm not comfortable doing that, and I have to rely on other people to help me, to coach me and to work with me on these processes. I think Mike Bolge was right today. If you can lock in profitability at this point, I don't know what the markets are going to do. Are soybeans going to be worth $2 more, $2 less at harvest? It's anybody's best guess. Tell me what the weather will be. So I don't have an answer for that, except to say that it's just an important part of farming right now, and I got to work harder at it, and be willing to know that I'm not going to get it right. I'm going to make mistakes, but I have to keep it in perspective about the whole profitability of the farm.
We've heard about meat and milk inspectors with sequestration problems like that. Have you got any answers on that?
Actually, in the furloughs, it's going to happen not only in meat and milk, it's also going to happen in grain inspections, in the FSA office, in the NRC offices. Basically, there will be a rotating of the furloughs that those people take. Those are unpaid furloughs, meaning that, they may have to take one day out of a week and take it off, but in order to not shut down the whole meat industry, there is going to be a rotating furlough, the last that we've heard in that particular aspect.
Other questions along those lines? Sequestration? Farm Bill? Todd's got a candidate. Go ahead.
Yes, my question of one of you up there on the panel had mentioned that you were involved in NASS, and I just, in our particular county, our county average actually came in higher than it did in 2005, which is hard for any of us to believe in that county, and I just wondered if you are familiar with how those yields are projected through NASS and what your thoughts are on that.
Which county? Boone County.
Well, I know just a little bit in discussions. I was out at the USD Economic Outlook a couple of weeks ago, and you visited with the crop insurance people. And one of the questions I had was, what about the discrepancies between counties in Illinois, for example? And her response to me was, well, these things are formula-based. They're based on formulas that were set up many, many years ago where we apply the newest numbers to those. But if the formula was wrong several years ago, we haven't necessarily corrected it. And so that's been part of the effort that they've been working at, I think, to get them right. But also remember, there's politics involved. There's winners and losers in farm insurance and crop insurance right now. If you look at it politically, it's a very politically charged part of ag policy is crop insurance, the risk management part of it, but also in terms of the fixed payments. So I don't know that I can answer it any better than to say that it is a problem, and they do know it, but they're not really working through it as quickly as we'd like to see.
But in response to how they accrue those numbers, basically one of my farms is a designated check farm, if you will, for the people that come around from the Illinois Statistical Service, which then feeds into NASS. But they come out basically from pollination clear through till the end of harvest, and check those fields every couple weeks to see the crop development. And then at harvest, they do take ears, weigh them, count the number of kernels on it, and create a subjective yield. And then after harvest, they call and want to know exactly what that field did make. The problem is it's only 1 point that they're looking at, and obviously they have various points around a county that they do those yields in. The other thing that they're looking at is they do call elevator operators and ask them, what are the yields that come across the scales, that people are known yields that they're willing to admit to, and based on, as John said, subjective. Based on what they had last year, are their bins as full as they normally are? Does it appear that the crop in that area, is worse or better? But the problem is the accuracy has gotten out of hand, if you will. And so, at some point, USDA will have to take a reckoning of correcting their yield formula.
I had a question for Ken Curtis. The first speaker said today that the goal of the Illinois Soybean Association was by the year 2020 to produce a 600 billion bushel crop. Ken, what would be a takeaway from today's message that you think is critical to reaching a goal like 600 billion bushel?
I would say to reach that, first thing we need to, in my opinion, is work with your soils. We're blessed with great soils, good organic matter. We need to cut the tillage, keep the carbon in the soil, let the carbon feed your microbes, and let the soil do a lot of the work. We've got a lot of good products out there from a lot of people that'll help enhance it, but work with the soil first. You get that, let it do it. It's there to work for you. So I'd say that's probably what I'd recommend.
Great. One more question. Is there one more question out there? With that, I'd like to thank you for your time, but especially I'd like to thank our producer panel. Let's give them a round of applause.
Thanks to the producer panel and to Steve Johnson from Iowa State for helping out with that. A couple of items on those farm policies, crop insurance, in particular your GRIP. If you happen to be, I think it's Marshall County, maybe a couple of other counties up north. If you had a GRIP policy, your county actually got paired with a county that's over on the western side of the state. This is kind of unusual. I know Gary Schnitke's taking care of this or trying to get them to understand this. And your county's yield may not look right. It's because it's with Mercer or Henderson in Marshall County. So Gary's working on that, but your GRIP payments don't show up correctly in that one at this point. Acre program. Many questions Gary's been getting about this one. Should I take acre this year? Somebody asked me that at a meeting last week. I have talked to Gary about it. Here's a simple answer to the question. You don't have to make the decision until what, June 3rd? And Gary says if the price of December, I think it's December corn, is below $4.60, then you might want to or take your acre payments or sign up for acre at that point. But you have until June 3rd to make that decision, and Gary probably will make some more comments as that comes along. Don't take my word for it, but watch Gary Schnitke's stuff on farmdocdaily.illinois.edu.